comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very good afternoon and welcome to the Briefing PM, an hour of the latest political news debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up over the next hour. It's just a few more days until Boris Johnson is no longer our Prime Minister. It's been a at times chaotic 3 and a bit years, but what should he be remembered for? We'll be looking back at Boris Johnson's time as Prime Minister. And who's going to take over as the next Conservative leader, though? Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak had their final hustings in London last night. I was there ahead of the announcement on Monday. But who will go up to Scotland to ask permission from the Queen to form a new government? We'll be looking ahead to probably almost certainly a Liz Truss premiership. And as Boris Johnson once again said he was more popular in Kyiv than in Kensington, we'll be heading to the Ukrainian capital to speak to a Member of Parliament there, Kira Ruddock, about the views on the outgoing Prime Minister and what they would like from the new incoming one. And as always, please do get in touch. You know the email address, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet me at gbnews. All that and so much more between now and 4 o'clock. But first, at the top of the hour, is the very latest news headlines with Rihanna.
Thank you, Darren. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson has promised £700 million in funding for the Sizewell C nuclear power station in Suffolk. In his final major policy speech as Prime Minister, he said he was confident it'll get over the line in the next few weeks. And he said it would be madness not to go ahead with the new power plant.
This project will create tens of thousands of jobs, but it will also power 6 million homes. That is roughly a fifth, 6 million homes, roughly a fifth of all the homes in the UK. So it will help to fix the energy needs, not just of this generation, but of the next. Renewables are not only helping us to defeat climate change, they're also helping to keep bills lower. Now, I say go nuclear and go large and go with Sizewell C.
Millions of households could face the biggest squeeze in living standards in over a century. The Resolution Foundation says the number of people living in absolute poverty is set to rise by 3 million in the next few years. The think tank adds that real household disposable income is on course to fall by 10% over this year and next. The government says it's preparing to provide extra support once the new Prime Minister's in place. Conservative MP Mark Harper says Rishi Sunak plans to tackle inflation if he gets the job.
Gripping inflation and not doing anything that risks making inflation worse. And his concern is that large unfunded tax cuts promised by his opponent in this contest would actually make inflation worse. That's not going to help families. So his focus is get inflation down, inflation that's being driven by global events, but get that down, stop it becoming embedded in the economy. That's how you help those 14 million families have a better quality of life.
Well, Shadow Secretary for Business and Industry Jonathan Reynolds says businesses should be given relief to prevent knock-on costs to customers.
So the starting point should be cutting business rates. We would increase the threshold for small business rates, relief to £25,000. So you're immediately getting help and hope to people that there will be some relief on the bills they've got to pay. Say the fertiliser plants in this country. They're not running. They can't afford to run. So you're putting into next year the inflation, the cost of food going up even further because they can't operate because fertiliser will therefore be more expensive.
Meanwhile, Liz Truss has hinted at further cost of living support this winter should she become Prime Minister. Writing in The Sun today, the Foreign Secretary claims if she gets the job, there'll be no new taxes, nor will there be energy rationing. Mr Sunak and Ms Truss took part in the final leadership hustings in front of Conservative members in London last night. The vote closes at 5 p.m. tomorrow. A team from the United Nations nuclear watchdog has arrived at the Zaporizhzhia power plant in Ukraine. Renewed shelling at Europe's largest nuclear site had delayed the visit of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Moscow and Kyiv have blamed each other for shelling, fueling fears of a potential radiation disaster. The inspectors say their mission is to try and stabilise the situation and prevent a nuclear accident. Southern Pakistan is braced for yet more flooding as overflowing river water is expected to arrive from the north. A third of the country is already underwater. The UK Disasters Emergency Committee has launched an appeal urging people to donate whatever they can to help with the relief effort. 6 million people are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. And tributes are being paid to veteran broadcaster Bill Turnbull, who's died aged 66 after a 5-year battle with prostate cancer. The former BBC Breakfast host was diagnosed in 2017, stepping down from his Classic FM show in October last year. His family says he died at home in Suffolk yesterday following a challenging and committed fight against the disease. Former BBC co-host Susanna Reid described him as the kindest, funniest, most generous man in the business. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now that it's back to the briefing with Darren.
Thank you very much indeed, Rhiannon. It is 6 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon. We're on TV, online, and of course on your radios as well. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Well, Boris Johnson, as you may have noticed, made an energy announcement a little bit earlier on today. You saw that in the news. It marks his final major speech, really, as Prime Minister. It's certainly been an eventful premiership, with Britain standing up to Russia over the war in Ukraine, getting Brexit done, and of course having to deal with a global pandemic in which the UK led the way in helping to create the first reliable vaccine. But Boris Johnson also leaves office amid a cost of living crisis and a series of scandals, which in the end brought down his premiership, including a fine by the Metropolitan Police. I've been looking back at Boris Johnson's political career, and here is my take on his last 3 years in office, but also his political career before that as well.
I have just been to see Her Majesty the Queen, who has invited me to form a government, and I have accepted. The doubters, the doomsters, the gloomsters, they are going to get it wrong again. The people who bet against Britain are going to lose their shirts because we're going to restore trust in our democracy.
As a child, he wanted to be king of the world, and for a time, Boris Johnson was indeed Conservative Party royalty. Imperious in his ambitions and commanding in his successes, getting Brexit done and vaccinating the nation. But for the people of Britain, that crown has now slipped. Dethroned over his failures, the victim of a coup of his own making. In many ways, he was an unlikely Prime Minister, a career built on a series of colourful media stunts.
Who says we can't organise gold medals?
Many of them planned, others less so. An everyman appeal, people seemed to overlook his privileged education at Eton and Oxford. He had a talent rare in politics. To be able to laugh at himself.
I'm so sorry. Are you okay?
But many weren't laughing. He was dogged by claims he was unfit for the office of Prime Minister, a charlatan, a joker, more interested in power than governing. A man of no conviction, said his critics, from cosmopolitan London mayor to a tough on-borders Brexiteer. And then there was his personal life, unconventional, that must be said for a Prime Minister. Married 3 times, a father to at least 7, a serial adulterer who once was locked out of his home by a former wife to the glee of the waiting paparazzi.
Covering the fields with their car parks, they dominate the landscape.
He started his career as a journalist, quickly embroiling himself in a string of controversies over, among other things, made-up quotes. But his exuberance, particularly in criticising the European Union, was getting him noticed. Became a regular on the BBC show Have I Got News for You?
Boris Johnson.
And by 1999, he was the editor of The Spectator. But now Boris Johnson was a celebrity, and in 2001 he was elected Conservative MP for Henley. He later supported his long-term frenemy from Oxford, David Cameron, to the leadership of the party. But Boris Johnson's political ambitions went well beyond Parliament. In 2008 he was elected as the Mayor of London, an unlikely Tory leader for a Labour-supporting city. He took on bendy buses, promoted cycling, his famous Boris bikes, and championed a global cosmopolitan London. And his star rose even further, achieving the status of an international figure as London hosted its enormously successful Olympics and Paralympics in 2012. Boris Johnson was by now a global name, with many thinking he was a Prime Minister waiting.
Boris Johnson is duly elected.
3 years later, he was back in Parliament, re-elected as an MP for a West London seat.
Thank you very much.
Many saw it as a direct challenge to David Cameron's Remainer premiership, and it was. The question of Brexit was now consuming Britain, and Boris Johnson was torn. He famously drafted 2 articles for The Telegraph, one in favour of leave, another backing Remain. Ultimately, after a career ridiculing the EU, he decided to put his money where his mouth was and support Brexit.
The last thing I wanted was to go against David Cameron or the government. But after a great deal of hard take, I don't think there's anything else I can do. I will be advocating vote Leave.
The Leave campaign was scrappy, divided and deadly effective. With Johnson as its mascot, if not its leader, its rallies were electric, harnessing the superstar power of the Boris effect. Culminated in a sensational win for the underdog campaign and a pivotal moment in British history with reverberations around the world. Cameron was out and the race to be the next Prime Minister was on. But it was now that Boris Johnson's luck seemed to have run out, betrayed by his close friend Michael Gove, who launched his own bid for number 10.
Having consulted colleagues and in view of the circumstances in Parliament, I have concluded that person cannot be me.
Theresa May's premiership got off to a strong start, party united and energised by her tough talk on getting out of the EU. For Boris Johnson, he found himself a step closer to the throne, appointed Foreign Secretary to the derision of some. For a while, Mrs May seemed unassailable, but her backbenchers plotted, suspicious of the former Remainer in number 10 and critical of her approach to a Brexit deal with Brussels. A snap election was called to boost the numbers of her allies in Parliament.
Strong and stable leadership.
But it was a disaster. May now led a minority government with a civil war in her own party. Boris Johnson, champion of the Brexiteers, sensationally resigned.
It is not too late to save Brexit.
Mrs May's deal with Brussels was quickly falling apart. By the summer of 2019, May was out, and Johnson got his second opportunity to grab the keys to number 10. This time, he was unbeatable. And despite a concerted Stop Boris campaign by Tory Remainers, he sailed to victory, supreme in his popularity among the party base.
Therefore, I give notice that Boris Johnson is elected as the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party.
But Mrs May's supporters were now the rebels, and deadlock in the Commons over a Brexit deal continued. The new Prime Minister, who'd promised to get Brexit done, called another snap election. And voters clamouring for an end to the Brexit saga and deeply suspicious of Labour under its hard left leader, Jeremy Corbyn, granted Boris Johnson a landslide. With his promises to level up the country, he smashed the so-called Red Wall, those historically Labour seats in the Midlands and the North, which had always seemed unwinnable to the Conservatives. Weeks after that election victory, Boris Johnson kept his promise to voters by getting Brexit done in a Christmas trade deal with the EU.
The noes to the left, 234.
Though for some that deal was a sellout, bringing up a new border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. But that triumph was short-lived. Worrying stories of a new virus from China started to emerge. Entire cities locked down to stop the spread. Soon there were desperate reports from hospital front lines in Italy. Case numbers were soaring, ICU wards overwhelmed. And then the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, arrived in Britain. Johnson's initial response appeared to be keep calm and carry on. The apocalyptic tones of reports from elsewhere would not happen here. That's what the lines seemed to be.
I think 20 seconds would be sufficient.
Happy birthday.
But inevitably the Prime Minister's cheerful libertarianism collapsed in the face of relentless briefings from his scientific advisors.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much.
Any hope of a policy of herd immunity was gone.
And I thank you all.
Boris Johnson gave an order to the British public that he'd never envisaged.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
He had hoped it would be a short-term measure. Britain would become a world leader in test and trace, we were told. A vaccine was on the way, the Prime Minister insisted. But then the unthinkable happens. He was hospitalised with the virus. Reports emerged that the Prime Minister was on a ventilator. There were whispered conversations in Whitehall that he could be about to die. For a few hours, it seemed that no one was in control. Boris Johnson did, however, recover, and for those among the public yet to encounter the deadly effect of coronavirus, well, the crisis really did seem more real. The virus was becoming better understood, and at a boost to the Prime Minister, Britain beat the world to a reliable vaccine, produced at cost price by AstraZeneca with research from Oxford University. And when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, Britain again led the world, standing up to Russia's aggression.
How are you? Nice to see you. I'm very, very, very glad to see you.
The Prime Minister was lauded in Kyiv and globally for sending weapons, money and support. To Downing Street's delight, the Kremlin effectively labelled him enemy number one. But it was the actions of the Prime Minister's staff, and indeed Boris Johnson himself, which sealed his fate in the minds of the public. First, there was the infamous lockdown-breaking trip to Barnard Castle by the Prime Minister's fearsome advisor Dominic Cummings, with his bizarre half-apology. Then it emerged that Number 10 had hosted garden parties, birthday cakes, quizzes and suitcases loaded with booze. There was the smirking admissions of festive parties, just as people were told not to see their loved ones at Christmas.
And it was not socially distanced.
And the damning evidence that the Prime Minister himself and those closest to him had broken the COVID rules they themselves had set. Multiple investigations were launched, including by the police, with more than 120 fines issued, and Boris Johnson becoming the first ever sitting Prime Minister to find to have broken the law.
I understand the anger that many will feel that I myself fell short when it came to observing the very rules which the government I lead had introduced to protect the public. And I accept in all sincerity that people had the right to expect better.
Crises followed like London buses. There were stories of drug abuse and porn watching by Tory MPs. Boris Johnson's time seemed to be running out. He was damaged by a narrower than hoped confidence vote.
that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
And devastated by an onslaught of by-election losses. And then his final mistake, accused of lying after claims of sexual assault were made against a colleague. An avalanche of resignations followed, culminating in his own.
And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks.
For Boris Johnson's long-term critics, it ended as they always said it would. A joke figure, deeply unsuited to high office, thrust into one of the most serious crises Britain has ever faced. But for supporters, he was precisely what the country needed. A breezy, sunny optimist who took on the establishment and won. A patriot who truly believes in the potential of Great Britain. And a conservative who smashed the red wall. How history will remember him will depend on the coming months and years. But for now, Boris Johnson's party is finally over, and the hangover has just begun.
There you go. Well, let's speak to the Conservative MP for Lichfield, and a pretty big fan, it must be said, of the current Prime Minister, the outgoing Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Michael Fabricant is down the line for us this afternoon. Michael, thank you very much, as always, indeed, for joining us. First of all, if there's one thing you would take away from Boris Johnson's premiership as a success, as the overwhelming thing that he got right, what would it be?
Well, there are so many, aren't there? And you listed many of them, actually, in your excellent presentation just now. I'll give you one that you didn't mention. You mentioned Brexit, but, you know, all the gloomsters, to use a Boris expression, were saying there's no way we can get a free trade agreement with the European Union. It's never been done before. And it hadn't been done before, but Boris did it. We got that free trade agreement. Yeah, we got Brexit done, the first vaccine developed in the UK, first public vaccine programme in the UK. I'm looking down at my very long list and editing many of them. With the war on Ukraine, we were the first country to actually supply arms to Ukraine in advance of the Soviet, or should I say Russian, invasion. So it prevented that very, very powerful thrust from the north trying to take Kiev, and the Russians failed. Why? Because they were using British NLAW ground-to-tank missiles. And there's so much that he's achieved, and I think, you know, that many people will say that Boris's great attribute was not being the jokester, as you rather unkindly said, but actually being the visionary.
Indeed, but he is on his way out, and that's because lots of your colleagues decided his time was up. Must be said somewhat prematurely, given the fact, Michael, that probably this time last year people were talking about a Boris Johnson decade. Why is that, though? Why? I think even by the end, even you were alluding to the fact that, you know, that things weren't working out and that he needed to go. Why did he have to go in the end? Why did the party decide that they'd had enough?
Well, I think certain members of the party actually started to panic. I think a number of them thought that they weren't going to win the next election. I think actually some of those people will be suffering from buyer's remorse. They will regret the decision to bring down Boris Johnson. I don't think I was actually at any time saying that Boris should go. What perhaps I was saying, sotto voce, was that maybe, just maybe, he should have some better people around him at number 10 Downing Street, because, you know, at the end of the day, the Prime Minister is someone who is the chairman of a company and the managing director of the civil service, if you like, the secretaries of state, and maybe he didn't have all the best people around him that he should.
And just very finally, Michael, what do you think he'll do next? I mean, there's much speculation. Will he stay as an MP? Will he face this Commons Privileges Committee that's going to look into Partygate? Will he potentially quit and go and make an awful lot of money on the speaking circuit, particularly in the US and elsewhere?
Well, I texted Boris and said to him, if Theresa May could make, I think it's $1.5 million or maybe £2 million on the speaking circuit, my gosh, he'll make zillions on the speaking circuit. And if I were he, I would actually, take a little bit of a step back and maybe reassess in a year from now, as I think we all will be, about his premiership. I personally think he'll say, yes, I made a few mistakes. But what he'll also say is, and I think others will too, you know what? If it hadn't been for his optimism, his professionalism in many respects, and his imagination and his drive, we would never have achieved all the things that we have achieved and which you so excellently mentioned in your report.
Michael, as always, really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Michael Fabricant there, the Conservative MP for Lichfield. Take a quick break on the briefing coming up in just a couple of minutes. We're speaking to Tim Montgomerie, former advisor to Boris Johnson, about his legacy as well. Plus, we've got more on that announcement, that big announcement about nuclear power that the Prime Minister Boris Johnson made a little earlier. That and much more in just a couple of minutes. But first, let's take a quick commercial break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Very welcome back to GB News. Let's bring in Tim Montgomerie to look back on Boris Johnson's legacy. Of course, senior GB News contributor and former advisor to Bojo, to Boris Johnson himself. We're looking back there with Michael Fabricant, and I did a little report on his time in office. What do you take away? Where do you think his legacy lies? How will history remember him?
Look,
he definitely won an election no one expected the Tories to win in the middle of 2019. I voted for the Brexit Party in those European elections because the Tory party was absolutely mired in the whole Brexit paralysis in Parliament. I think, if I remember rightly, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but the Tories ended up behind the Green Party in that
Sixth,
election.
I think, weren't they?
Yeah. And so to go from that to a majority of 80, in about 6 months was a considerable achievement. It was down to Boris to a large extent. He stopped Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister. He got Brexit over the line. And I became, you introduced me as a former advisor to Boris Johnson, but it was very much former. I only lasted a little while because when I went into Downing Street, I saw a change in Boris that really was quite stark. The guy that listened to people, that was open to all different sources of advice, I think he suddenly thought he could almost walk on water because of the enormity of his triumph. And the guy, when he was Mayor of London, who really was open to different perspectives, suddenly stopped listening, relied too much on Dominic Cummings, and I felt the administration was going in the wrong direction, and that's why I left. And since then, all the problems that Liz Truss is about to inherit, I think it will be Liz Truss, the channel crossings, the extent of taxation, the consequences of lockdown, et cetera. We all know what the problems are in the country at the moment. They all happened under Boris's watch. So I think history's going to be very mixed.
What do you think he's going to do next? I mean, I can't imagine he's going to go quietly into the night.
Well, even if he believed that he was going quietly into the night, even
he
if he
wouldn't be able to do it.
Because we all love talking about Boris.
Yeah.
Whether you hate Boris or you love Boris, he's box office. I was the US columnist for the Times during the election between Trump and Hillary Clinton, and I used to go to Hillary Clinton rallies, and I never wanted to go to one again because they were so dull. Forget the politics, but Trump was interesting. It was fascinating. People, the banks of faces behind him, people smiled, they laughed.
Well, and people say, and he was funny. Like
he was funny. And people are bored with... You and I love politics, and hopefully lots of our viewers love politics, but lots of people don't like politics. And someone like Trump and Boris comes along, and because they're as much celebrities as politicians, they entertain people. And so Boris will continue to distract from whoever is the next Tory leader, whoever is the next Prime Minister. And he will need to be very disciplined not to overshadow them.
Let's just tilt forward if we can, because there is going to be a new Prime Minister in a matter of days now. As you alluded to, it's almost certainly going to be Liz Truss, unless we're all going to have to eat lots and lots of humble pie.
Lots of humble pie, yeah.
But she is going to face an uphill struggle, from the start, isn't she? The in-tray is exceptional.
Yeah, so we say that Liz Truss is going to win the Conservative leadership, but what kind of win, what kind of victory is it? She'll have a honeymoon, but how long will it last? I think those first 3-4 days are going to be critical. I think she needs to apologise for the mess that this summer has been. No one has really been impressed, I think, including Conservative Party members, by the extended nature of a contest which has meant questions about how people are going to pay their energy bills have gone unanswered. She needs to apologise. She needs to appoint a cabinet of all the talents, try to bring the Conservative Party back together. But most of all, within those first 2 or 3 days, an emergency budget, an emergency statement of some kind, really to reassure people that she has a plan to help particularly the poorest people in our country. But, middle-class, middle-income families are going to be struggling too to get through the energy crisis.
Tim, you and I will be covering it, of course, as well. Thank you very much indeed. Tim Montgomerie there, joining us in the studio. OK, we'll take a quick break here on GB News. For the news, coming up in just a couple of minutes, though, we're going to be in Ukraine, looking at the Prime Minister's legacy there, finding out more about that Sizewell C nuclear announcement from Boris Johnson a little bit earlier, and a lot more before 4. But first, let's bring you up to date with the news headlines. It's back to Rihanna.
Thank you, Darren. It's coming up to 3:33. Your top stories in the GB newsroom. And some breaking news in the last few minutes. Merseyside Police says 2 guns were used in the shooting that killed Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. The 9-year-old died after a gunman chased his intended target into her home. Police say they weren't known to the family. 2 men were arrested on suspicion of murder, but they've been released on bail. Boris Johnson has promised £700 million in funding for the Sizewell C nuclear power station in Suffolk. In his final major policy speech as Prime Minister, he said he was confident it'll get over the line in the next few weeks.
This project will create tens of thousands of jobs, but it will also power 6 million homes. That is roughly a fifth. 6 million homes, roughly a fifth of all the homes in the UK. So it will help to fix the energy needs, not just of this generation, but of the next. Renewables are not only helping us to defeat climate change, they're also helping to keep bills lower. Now, I say go nuclear and go large and go with Sizewell C.
Millions of households could face the biggest squeeze in living standards in over a century. The Resolution Foundation says the number of people living in absolute poverty is set to rise by 3 million in the next few years. The think tank warns real household disposable income is on course to fall by 10% over this year and next. And southern Pakistan is bracing itself for more flooding as overflowing river water is expected to arrive from the north of the country. The UK Disasters Emergency Committee has launched an appeal urging people to donate whatever they can to help with the relief effort. 6 million people are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. It's back to the briefing with Darren in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very welcome back. It is 23 minutes to 4 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon on TV, online and on your radios as well. Do get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. We'll get a couple of those later on in the programme. I'm sure you've got a view about Boris Johnson and his premiership, and indeed how we've covered it here on GB News. But let's turn to a pretty big announcement by the Prime Minister today. In fact, frankly, his last major announcement as PM, because as the cost of living crisis continues to ravage the public finances and the finances of people across the country, Boris Johnson spoke earlier in Suffolk, which is the proposed location of a new nuclear power plant, Sizewell C. The Prime Minister advocated the expansion of the use of nuclear power in order to bring down increasing energy bills and curtail dependence on Russian energy. The Prime Minister began by suggesting that Russia was trying to weaponise energy, but that strategy would fail. Let's listen.
What Putin has done is to launch a kind of kamikaze attack on the world economy. He doesn't care how much pain Russia suffers. He believes that ultimately we will flinch, that Western politicians don't have the stomach for the fight. He believes that we will give up on Ukraine, give in to his aggression, and go back to mainlining his hydrocarbons. And I have to tell you, he is wrong. He's wrong in his assumption about the British people. I think he's wrong in his assumption about other European governments too, by the way. I talked to Olaf Scholz last night, and it's absolutely clear that Germany is resolute in moving away from dependence on Russia. And Putin, in this strategy, is going to fail. So we're helping people now with the cost of living, and of course there will be more cash to come, whoever takes over from me in the months ahead. Substantial sums, that's absolutely clear. But even more important than that, our British energy security strategy, Great British Nuclear, is rectifying the chronic mistakes of the past. And so I say to you with the prophetic candour and clarity of one who is about to hand over the torch of office, I say go nuclear and go large and go with Sizewell C.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson speaking a little earlier. Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, is with me in the studio. And Tom, you know, this is effectively the Prime Minister's last major speech. He focused on nuclear energy. He's been banging on about it for a long time, but it is very much he views as part of what he would want to see as his legacy.
Yes, and it's a very good legacy point to end on, I suppose, because these are long-term issues. In fact, there's a famous video now of Nick Clegg speaking back in 2010 saying that we can't possibly go for nuclear because it's not a solution. It would only come on stream in 2021, 2022. Well, look where we are now. So potentially this sort of announcement is what Boris Johnson wants to see, wants people to revisit a decade from now, looking back at this sort of turning point in nuclear energy, because, as he mentioned in that speech, it was only in 1995 that we constructed the last nuclear power station in this country. Then there were 2 decades of indecision, of no new decisions, of no new investment, of really retreating from nuclear. And in that time, China built 50 nuclear power stations. Our European friends and neighbours built dozens of nuclear power stations, and we built none. He really zeroed in on Tony Blair and Gordon Brown not constructing any nuclear power stations and saying that Margaret Thatcher and John Major built them, although he didn't quite mention the indecision from David Cameron or Theresa May either. But I suppose there is now this growing consensus that nuclear energy is clean, is safe, is reliable, and is necessary to deliver greater energy security in the future. It's just such a shame that it's come now because, of course, more British nuclear reactors are being decommissioned over the next decade than those that are planned to be built and get going.
And the other problem, of course, is that these things don't happen today or tomorrow or even the day after. And yet, obviously, we are still facing an autumn and winter that's going to be incredibly difficult. This is not going to deal, essentially, with anything that's going to happen over the next coming months or years. Boris Johnson alluded again that there will be more cash for people, and yet we still wait. We still wait to find out who's going to win this damn race.
Absolutely. Well, the Prime Minister made it very clear upon the moment that he resigned that no big new changes in policy direction would be announced from Number 10. In fact, it's arguable whether this Sizewell C announcement today is a departure from that commitment, and some people may argue over that, although the Prime Minister had previously said in speeches in the House of Commons before he resigned that he wanted to bring about a new dawn of nuclear power in this country, that he wanted to go from building 1 nuclear reactor a decade to 1 a year over the next 8 years, however those averages work out. So arguably, he's continuing this policy that was already announced, but clearly this is a decision as well. The big point that his spokespeople have made over the last few months is that this is not a government that feels able to make those decisions or that would be constitutionally right in making those big policy decisions, changes in policy, big spending decisions, binding the hands of the next administration. That's something that cannot be done. So yes, we're going to have to wait until Tuesday and the new installation of the next Prime Minister for those big decisions to be made.
And just very finally, Tom, last hustings were last night at Wembley. I was there. You would have thought, in many ways, actually being there, that Rishi Sunak was about to win this race, given the number of supporters there and how enthusiastic they were. But it was in London. I think she would probably consider as home territory to a large degree. But what we did get is lots of commitments from Liz Truss, left, right and centre, looking into smart motorways, no more taxes, etc, etc, etc.
Absolutely. Read my lips.
Yeah.
No new taxes, as Nick Ferrari asked her to commit to. Now, that's something...
Very George W. Bush.
Very George W. Bush. Something that many people say condemned George W. Bush to being a one-term president in the United States of America, losing, of course, in 1992 to Bill Clinton, and indeed Ross Perot getting a sizable chunk of that
it's
vote.
not an excuse, this programme, Tom, just to show off your knowledge.
Well, it's important to look at the context because the right was split in that presidential election in 1992. A lot of Republicans splitting off because of that broken promise on taxes. Clear promises like that from Liz Truss. We can draw a clear analogy, I suppose. She has cast herself in an ideological mould that she wants to be, in many ways, the first ideological Prime Minister in this country since Margaret Thatcher. She's been saying across the course of this campaign that she will not forget that she's not only Prime Minister for the country, but also leader of the Conservative Party. A funny phrase that she wrote down in the Conservative Home website. It's almost an inverse version of the phrase that we so often hear from Prime Ministers when they become Prime Minister, saying, I'm not just a Prime Minister for those that voted for me, I'm a Prime Minister for the whole country. Liz Truss basically saying the opposite, that she will govern as a Conservative, which I think some people feel that for the last 12 years, and yes, various shades of hung parliaments and coalitions and not Tory majority governments, but even so, people have felt that the Conservative Prime Ministers that we've had over the last decade or so have not always been party-faithful Prime Ministers. Liz Truss making some very big promises to the party last night that she will be that Conservative Prime Minister, that she will govern as she has campaigned, that she will not raise taxes and that she will endeavour to grow the economy and thereby shrink the state as a proportion of GDP. Some really big promises made there and a lot that she'll have to live up to if she wins this contest.
Indeed, and other big wider questions, of course, about where that leaves the Red Wall, who in many ways voted for Boris Johnson because he didn't seem to be necessarily a Conservative Prime Minister, but that is a discussion for another time. Tom Howard, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme. Now, let's turn to Ukraine, because Boris Johnson, of course, visited the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, last week to mark the country's Independence Day. It was the outgoing Prime Minister's third visit to Ukraine since Russia's invasion began 6 months ago. And as well as announcing a further £54 million in military support, he was also presented with the Order of Liberty Medal, which is Ukraine's highest award that's been given to foreign nationals. Well, delighted, as always, to say I'm joined by the Ukrainian Member of Parliament, Kira Ruddock, who joins us down the line. Kira, thank you, as always, for joining us. And we talked a little about this last week, didn't we? The sense, and Boris Johnson continues to make jokes about it here in the UK, I don't know if you're aware about this, that he's more popular in Kyiv than he is in Kensington in West London, that he is a popular figure there in Ukraine.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Well, it is indeed true. I just turned off my radio here, and there was a song which included Boris Johnson's saying "Dobry večer, everybody," which in Ukrainian is "Good evening, everybody." I can tell you there are Boris Johnson burgers in the local stores here. So he is incredibly popular, and the support of Great Britain in this war is definitely related in people's minds to Boris Johnson as a figure. He is really right now like a household name, where people are relating to him as to President Zelensky or somebody that they like definitely know and really, really like. So I do believe that his statement is right. He's more popular in Ukraine, not only than in Kensington, but probably than anywhere else.
What is the thought process, though, about who's going to take over? I think you guys, as in, the Ukrainians and the government, have been speaking to both the candidates in the leadership race. A real emphasis, I would assume, from both of them, that they want to carry on taking that line of support for you and your fellow Ukrainians.
Yes, of course, both candidates are claiming that they would continue the support and that we can count on the governmental politics to be the same as it was before, supporting Ukraine, taking leadership on sending us weapons. And I guess the important thing would be when the Prime Minister is elected, what would be the first steps and if we would actually continue seeing it in practice. Because right now they are on the election race, and of course their claims would be to continue the support. I do hope that it would not be only in sending Ukraine weapons, but also in work with unfreezing Russian assets and using them to help Ukraine. This is an incredibly important direction. Both candidates also claim that they are interested in pursuing this path, and I personally do believe that this is one of the ways to cover for the increasing cost of energy and also to cover for the support for Ukraine that has been increased as well.
And just very finally, Kira, just looking at the operation on the ground, how things are there in regards to the war. And we know, obviously, Ukraine has started a counteroffensive in Kherson in the south. But there are concerns that the Russians could do the same in parts of the east.
We are concerned about two things right now. Well, the first is obviously the nuclear station, and there has been the UN watchdog delegation coming in and checking what's going on there. But we still feel extremely threatened by being like one step away from another catastrophe. Second concern, obviously, is the forces of Russia that are moved to the south and the increased attacks in the east. However, the changes are really minimal, and we see right now the better performance of Ukrainian army than of Russian at the east, and we do hope that till autumn comes, we will be able to regain certain territories and get into the situation where it would be impossible to fight due to the weather condition at much better state than we are right now.
OK, Kira, as always, thank you so much for your time this afternoon and indeed for appearing on the programme. That is Kira Ruddock, the Member of Parliament there in Ukraine. Now we're going to end on a bit of sport, and you might want to brace yourself for the story. Do you remember those football sticker books? Well, according to research that's been done into it, the World Cup sticker book for this year, 2022 sticker album, and the World Cup is, 3 months away, has been released. But in order to fill it up, football fans are going to have to spend a hell of a lot of money. Apparently, it could be up to 900 quid. Is there a cheaper way of doing it? How ludicrous is all of this? Let's speak to the sports broadcasting journalist Aidan McGee, who is in the studio with us. 900 quid for a couple of stickers and a book.
A couple? No, you need a few more than that.
You do need a lot. You
know what? I'm surprised it's actually made a story because, you know, it's received widespread coverage yesterday and this morning in various different outlets. Now, the issue is that the price of a sticker book, and this is what the coverage has been predicated on, has gone. A price of a packet of stickers has gone from 80p to 90p. Now, I suppose it's a story for its time in a way because that's 10p. It's gone up. It's inflation, all the rest of it. But between 2016, which was the Euros, and 2018, which was the Russia World Cup, it went up from 50 to 80, and nobody bats an eyelid, you know. So it's always been expensive. I mean, the thing is, you can't guarantee when you fill the book that you're not going to get duplicate stickers. That's where the whole swapsy culture came from. You know, I remember in the playground when you'd be there with your mates, and sometimes
trade an Eric Cantona for Thierry Henry or something.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No. Did they cross over? No. They missed each other by about 2 years. But I'll get the premise of it. But
False girls or something.
But seriously, if you could buy a ticket, if you could buy a packet of stickers with 6 stickers in it, you could at the start of the book, if it's empty, the chances are you would fill it up and you'd use it up. But then by the end of it, you're going to get duplicates, and that's where the swaps culture comes in. But I think there's been an inordinate amount of coverage on this. I think that it was always expensive to fill the books. It was expensive even 20 years ago. So nothing's really changed on that. But further to that, I'd say that there's been a counter trend on this because we were told, in the 80s and 90s, weren't we, that the last printed books, periodicals would be done by the early 2000s. I mean, they're doing a roaring trade, and I think that the lockdown actually brought out revived a bit of nostalgia for people digging out their old sticker books, and they're going strong. I mean, the company's turning over tens of millions of pounds every year. They've been brought back to Italy, having been handed around. Panini, this is, from failing business to failing business in the 80s and 90s. It was a subject of a tabloid war between Murdoch and Maxwell back in the 80s. So they've got huge checkered history, that's for sure.
And all this, of course, comes at a time in which, you know, the World Cup itself probably not being as controversial a World Cup for quite a long time.
Never.
In terms of, obviously, where it's been held, the time of the year it's been held, and continued questions about human rights abuses as well. And David Beckham's been facing some criticism, hasn't he, in recent days?
Yeah, look, he's been facing criticism
for a long time.
Well, he has, because, I mean, I spoke about it on Mark Dolan's show about a couple of months ago. I mean, why he's getting involved in this, why he's aligning himself with this World Cup. I mean, one of the controversial things about the Panini issue is that they said that it would take something like 1,400 hours, working hours, for a person who's been working on a stadium in Qatar to earn enough money to pay to fill his sticker book. His or her sticker book. So, I mean, that puts it into some kind of context. But in terms of Beckham, yeah, I mean, look, he doesn't need the money. He cannot be enhancing his brand by doing this. He can only attract criticism. Is he doing it to try and stay relevant because he's got the Miami franchise back in the States? I don't really know, but to me it seems like a foolhardy thing. I can only think he may have signed up for it maybe 2 or 3 years ago, because these maybe pre-lockdown, and perhaps the focus wasn't on the World Cup, because we've seen it magnified in the last few months, and people are seeing what this World Cup is going to look like. Now, we hope it's not as bad as we think, but we're having a World Cup, Darren, in an area the size of Yorkshire. I don't think that's ever been done before. I'd be very surprised. We're used to having it in big, sprawling areas like Brazil. England doesn't even have one since 1966.
Yeah.
It's a scandal that Qatar have had it before us, but that's another story.
We'll see, indeed. Aidan, as always, thank you very much indeed.
Darren.
Aidan McGee there in the studio for us. Let's end on some your views. Lots of you been getting in touch. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Paul says Boris was booted out unfairly and Sunak helped that happen. Elaine says, bring back Boris with good advisors. I agree with Michael Fabricant, the MP for Lichfield there. Ian says he won the election because nobody wanted Corbyn, not necessarily because they wanted Boris Johnson. Stephen says, why are we decommissioning existing nuclear power plants instead of extending the operating licences until new ones come on stream? And Christine ends by saying Boris was a fantastic Prime Minister. Always get in touch. GBViews at gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet us at gbnews. We always like to get a cross-section of views here on the channel. And that is it from me for today, and indeed for this programme. After, hundreds of shows, just over a year, we're going to come to an end. Thank you very much for those that have watched over the last year or so. I will be back next week, though, live from Westminster with what promises to be another extraordinary week in British politics, as Boris Johnson does step down as Prime Minister and a new Prime Minister, either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak, does take over. We'll have extensive coverage of that from next Monday. Arlene Foster will be back here at 3 o'clock, though, tomorrow. And Patrick Christys, who's taking over this slot next week at 3, is up next between 4 and 6. Stay tuned for that. We'll leave you on this Thursday afternoon with the weather from the Met Office. From me, for now, goodbye and have a nice weekend.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather updates. The weather is definitely on the change. A few more showers around tomorrow. Still, many places will be dry and bright with sunny spells. For many, quite a warm and humid feel. High pressure is still just about holding on, but we're being pushed from both the northwest and the south by weather fronts, both likely to introduce more and more showers as we go through tomorrow. Only 1 or 2 showers around this evening and overnight, but still 1 or 2 heavy ones across southwest England in particular. And later in the night, we'll see a few more drifting up across southern England once more, maybe into the Midlands, perhaps parts of East Wales. Elsewhere, most places dry, and it will be clear and it's quite cool across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Temperatures down to single figures for some. Some mist and fog patches are also likely, whereas it'll be quite warm and humid to start Friday across the south. Quite a lot of cloud then to begin with for England and Wales. Certainly across central areas and some heavy showers developing. Hit and miss, so no guarantees if you're after rain that you will see much, but where it does rain, I say, the showers could be pretty lively. And the rain turning heavier across western Scotland, the east of Northern Ireland through the day. Much of eastern England, eastern Scotland staying dry and fine with some warm sunshine across the southeast. 27 is possible. Elsewhere, high teens or low 20s. The showers will continue to drift northwards across England and Wales, and the rain will continue to pep up across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. Some bright colours here, some really quite heavy rain as we head into the weekend. And this line of rain could last for most of Saturday across parts of southwest Scotland and Northern Ireland. So we have issued a yellow warning for that rainfall that could cause some problems. Elsewhere, heavy showers likely during Saturday. Again, hit and miss with some sunny spells in between and not much getting to the east coast of England or the northeast of Scotland. The winds will be picking up, however, through Saturday, and that's going to be a feature through the course of the weekend as we see spells of showers across the country. Still quite warm and humid, however.